air without blowing it all to bits. He got that idea from spirits that were telling him how to make this thing. So here you have Jack Parsons. Marvel figures. They made a comic book about Jack Parsons, 40 and Times. He was called the Rocket Man, and he was steep into the occult. Jack Parsons and this guy here, L. Ron Hubbard, the father of Scientology, they were trying to do what, see, Aleister Crowley, let's go back here. Eliphas Levi conjured Yoda. Aleister Crowley conjured a devil called Lam, L-A-M, who just happened to look like the picture of every one of these gray aliens that you've seen, including the ones that showed up in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That came from Aleister Crowley. So then we have L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons, who were trying to do something that Crowley couldn't do. They said he had an unfinished work. They believed in a spirit test, a goddess called Babylon, B-A-B-A-L-O-N. It's right out of the book of Revelation. And what they wanted to create what am I trying to say here? They wanted to have a ritual that would bring forth the star child onto the earth from Babylon, which would basically be the Antichrist, the beast. They wanted to bring in and give birth to the beast. They never quite succeeded yet. It wasn't time yet. And so they failed. But these men are some of the most influential men in the world. You have Jack Parsons. You have L. Ron Hubbard, the father of Scientology, who's now gone on to be with the devils in hell. He's dead. L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology. John Travolta, Tom Cruise. You ever heard of those names? Movies that are Scientology inspired, that have these mystery ideas and these mystery concepts embedded in them. Two of which were blatantly and openly Scientologist propaganda. One was called Battlefield Earth. There's John Travolta. There's one that came out just recently. It's one of the big summer flops. It's called After Earth, and it's with Will Smith, also Scientologist. So they're telling you these mystery doctrines and these mystery secrets without you really knowing and understanding what they are. They're doing the work of the false prophet, teaching you of the Christs and the gods that God said don't go worshiping after. I mentioned to you earlier, looking at some of these comic book writers. Where'd he go? Dan Brown knows his stuff. He's a researcher. He knows his stuff. Who wrote Harry Potter? She studied the occult. She knew magic. Was she a witch? I don't know. I just know that she knew her stuff. J.K. Rowling. The guy who wrote the script for this Son of Satan, Steve Gerber, I don't know anything about him, but he knows his stuff. They incorporate secret mysteries and teachings and magic inside of these books. And kids like me, I read them and I go, ooh, oh, help me, Son of Satan. He's a superhero. Jack Kirby. You ever heard of that name? Okay, if you know comic books, you know Jack. You know Jack Kirby. One of the most prolific comic book authors and writers and artists that there ever has been. He's like the god of comic books. He was the creator of the Fantastic Four, the Silver Surfer, and others. He was born, Jack Kirby's not his real name. He was born Jacob Kurtzberg, Jewish. He was raised in Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah. In fact, and I get this information from, what's the book? Our Gods Wear Spandex. And this guy who was a major proponent of these God themes in these comic books, he's not a Christian. He's telling you that all these authors, and this is where I got the information from, he's saying, yeah, they were all taught in the occult. Jack Kirby, he said at one time when he was a boy, he had pneumonia, and back then they didn't know how to heal, they didn't know how to give antibiotics, things like that. And he was about to die, so they brought in these Kabbalist rabbis to perform an exorcism over him. So he had an influence in the occult, and that comes out because he starts doing these things. He did a series called The New Gods. There it is right here, Jack Kirby's New Gods. Remember, that's what God warned us about. Don't go after the new gods. Don't follow the false prophet who shows you signs and wonders and says, let's go after the new gods or the other gods. God said, don't do it. And Jack Kirby said, I can do it. He's a false prophet. The comic book series, The New Gods, was part of what they called Jack Kirby's Fourth World Omnibus. It was a series of comic books. It was a collective of the New Gods, the Forever People, and Mr. Miracle. Here is a description from Our Gods Wear Spandex of what Jack Kirby's New Gods in his Fourth World Omnibus is all about. They were referred to as extra-dimensional gods, superhuman beings who traveled to Earth with the use of the boom tube, sounds like a TV, a sort of stargate that bridged dimensions. Remember that? The god of the new gods was the source. Stop right here. Neo in the Matrix movies had to go and be injected back into the source. He had to go back to the source, the architect, the main computer mainframe. So it's the same idea, the source, the main functionary behind the force, which is the dragon. So the god of the new gods was the source, an omnipotent energy field that plays the exact same role in the Fourth World's comics that the force plays in Star Wars. This is not me coming up with this. This was a guy who studies comic books, knows the mythology of it, knows the magic of it, and is in favor of it. And he's telling you what this is. Then you have comic book writer Steve Englehart. Here's one of his titles here, The Long Man. He is the one who came up with Doctor Strange. And here's what Steve Englehart said about this character, Doctor Strange, that he came up with. Notice what he said. When I took on his solo series, I decided I should learn a little about magic. And it led to a continuing interest in the subject. So Jack Kirby, Steve Englehart, some of these others, they're telling you they studied magic. And not just magic, M-A-G-I-C. M-A-G-I-C-K. That comes from Crowley. When I do this with little kids, okay? I do what I call little magic tricks. Actually, it's just prestidigitation and so on. Okay, I can make this guy disappear. Oh, look, here he is. Okay, that's what everybody says. Oh, do a magic trick. When it's magic with a C-K, you're talking some deep, deep stuff. You're talking Crowley and Eliphas Levi stuff is what you're talking about. You're talking about conjuring devils that should stay buried somewhere because these are mean and nasty things. Here's what comes to mind. In Revelation chapter 9, there is a group of devils that are hidden. They're kryptonited. They're locked away. They're secret. They're buried in the pit, the gods of the pit. And they want out. But a door, a portal has to be opened so they can be let out. Think about it. Alan Moore did stuff for DC Comics. One of his series was called From Hell, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Constantine, and V for Vendetta. Every one of these comic book series ended up being movies. From Hell. I saw League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I saw Constantine. I wasn't impressed. I've never saw V for Vendetta. He is described as a practicing ritual magician and student of the occult sciences. Neil Gaiman. Here is one of his here. He won 2005 Nebula Awards. Neil Gaiman came up with a comic series called The Eternals. It was based on Jack Kirby's Vril-Ya analog. Now, I haven't explained what the Vril is yet. It's a race of supermen that are under the earth. Get ready for this one. So Neil Gaiman comes along. Jack Kirby, who knows about the Vril, a race of supermen buried under the earth. Neil Gaiman is going to expand on that, and he comes up with a comic book series called The Eternals. Neil Gaiman's father was a student of L. Ron Hubbard, who was a student of Aleister Crowley. See the connection? As the Father is, so is the Son. This guy has a lifelong of learning of the occult sciences, Scientology, Aleister Crowley, you name it. Let's just lay it out like this. I know a lot about the Bible because my mom saw fit to drag me and my sister to Sunday school every Sunday morning, Sunday night for church, Wednesday night for church. That's all I've known all my life was what's in this Bible. Some of these other kids grow up in houses where they do rituals and they practice magic and they talk to devils and they do seances and they study occult books that nobody could touch. I won't even read some of them because they're that evil. And this is how this kid grew up in his house. And he knows about the Vril Yah. He knows about a race of supermen under the earth. I'll show you that in a little bit. A fellow by the name of Grant Morrison. He was responsible for the revamp of the Justice League, the X-Men, Fantastic Four. You've heard of all these. The Invisibles. In coming up with the Invisibles, Morris claimed that the Invisibles was actually dictated to him by an alien race he contacted while he was in the Himalayas. They inspired it. They inspired his ideas. The spirit of these false prophets. Let me show you what that looks like in the Bible. Ahab, the wicked king. And God was going to have Ahab led into battle, whereby Ahab was going to be killed, and the prophecy of Elijah was going to be fulfilled. And so God wanted Ahab to go into battle the next day. And so God is in heaven. This is coming from the scriptures. God says, who'll go and convince Ahab that he needs to go into battle? And a spirit, an evil spirit, jumped up and said, I'll do it. God said, how are you going to do it? And the spirit said, I will go and I will be a lying word in the mouths of the prophets of Ahab. Ahab had about 400 prophets. And so God says, go. And this spirit went down there and inspired these prophets to tell Ahab, Ahab, God says go into battle. You're going to be victorious. Ahab says, cool. The next day, the dogs are licking the blood out of Ahab's chariot. You see how it ends up? So there are spirits who indoctrinate, breathe, inspire. Comic book writers, novelists, theologians, book writers, movie makers. Here's the graphic here, the Justice League of America that Grant Morrison worked on. Here's several copies of The Invisibles that Grant Morrison said was dictated to him by an alien race. And this idea of these comic book writers being indoctrinated and being inspired to tell these fantastic... See, if it was just about a guy on a boat who caught a fish and brought it home to his wife and cooked it for supper, you wouldn't read it. Nobody would read it. It's got to be this big, fantastic, bizarre story that nobody's ever heard of. And the comic book writers now are simply standing on the shoulders of giants that preceded them. With the occult revival in the 1800s, you had a new line of books that were coming out. These were no longer just stories of Jack and the Beanstalk. You had Mary Shelley, who wrote of Frankenstein, Frankenstein's monster, the new Prometheus. I'm going to show you that in a little bit. The new Prometheus. Prometheus was a god. Bram Stoker's Dracula, H.G. Wells, The War of the Worlds, The Time Machine, Jules Verne, From Earth to the Moon. These were the science fiction writers of old who were expanding man's ability to think inside the boundaries of his three-dimensional world, outside of what could happen if. I mean, here, Mary Shelley gives life to a dead man. And now he's like immortal. He can't be killed. Okay, he's like Jason and Freddy Krueger, right? And what was the guy from Halloween? Michael Myers. Okay,